Ashe family, welcome back to another episode of My Unapologetic Perspective. This is the podcast where we give our point of view of controversial topics from my experience, Black history, and our knowledge as African Americans. Black history presently lives in us so we can continue to excel into the future. It's one thing to know Black history. It's another thing to take advantage of what the people in Black history did for you. Happy Black History Month. Your host, Martre Baker Stevens, and to the right of me is Shaquan Battle.
Happy Black History Month.
And to the right of him is Jerome Battle.
What's up? I don't say happy birthday to my brother, Eugene. Happy birthday, man.
Happy birthday, Aunt.
Happy birthday, Aunt.
We appreciate all the love and support we've been getting. We still been posting a little bit on social media. I'm doing 28 days of why Black history is important. That's getting a lot of love on TikTok and Instagram. Facebook, I think they kind of silencing me right now, but it is what it is. But like I said, I appreciate all the love and support we've been getting. We back. I know we've been gone for a minute, but we had to refresh a little bit. We had to take some time, give them an opportunity to get a little bit of rest, and we can come back and, man, be motivated. And the topic that we got today is definitely going to be one of them ones.
I wonder if we scare some people with what we say on this podcast sometimes.
What do you mean?
I just wonder if this is a great topic that we're going to talk about, because the information that we've been providing is part of the substance behind the concept we're going to talk about today,
right,
about being woke. And I wonder, when we start waking up people, does it scare some people?
Yeah. Once people realize what that reality is, it's like the Matrix, right? You know what I mean?
Right.
Like the Matrix movie. Like once you realize that reality is not the real reality, it will scare the hell out of you.
That's right.
But as you said on life, don't be scared.
Don't be scared. The other
don't be
thing
scared.
is we have to understand that what's happening once we start waking up, folks, is then the other side start doing more to try to suppress you and some of the concepts and the teachings, which we're going to talk about.
Let's jump right into it. Let's not waste no time.
That's not even the other race. That could be your own race.
Oh,
too.
absolutely.
No,
I
we're
mean,
gonna get into that.
You see
too.
Bake post these great things on, like you said, like a minute ago on Facebook, and they don't get nothing.
That's right.
It is what it is, though. But you know what I'm saying? Like my message just says otherwise. People are listening, but some people just may be afraid to show that publicly, which is cool. You know what I mean? But we definitely gonna try to break that mentality. What we're gonna talk about today is, I think that the topic is gonna be called how they hijacked woke.
Okay.
How about that? How about how they hijacked woke? Let's do that.
Like they hijacked slavery.
So when we talk about what woke is, right? I'm going to read this quote. We must fight the woke in our schools. We must fight the woke in our businesses. We must fight the woke in government agencies. And this is from Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, whatever his name is, recently declared from the stage at a campaign event. We never, ever surrendered to woke ideology. And I tell you this, the state of Florida is where woke goes to die. Right? So when we think about woke, it has been being used right now as political propaganda. It's on the tongue of every news anchor. It's on every social media post. It's one of the most pushback things that's happening right now. But let's go back to its origins and what it means, because this is the unapologetic perspective, and us as Black men, speaking from a Black perspective, we're gonna go back to what it means to us and make people understand what its true intentions were, and how we can get back to that level. People come up with all different kind of terms of what woke means, right? And the true definition and understanding is the understanding of racial injustice for Black people.
Absolutely.
Let's just put it in its simplest term. That's what it was. Understanding the racial injustice for Black people. And that happened on so many levels that we talk about on this podcast: the education, the politics, the media, the justice system, economics, or religion, if you want to go there. But, woke used to mean when another Black person gives you knowledge about what's happening to other Black people. You know what I'm saying? You see that person coming a mile away, and you like, oh, here he come with some of that knowledge, some of that information. And it's funny, but it's some truth into what we're saying, right? So we can look at those type of things, maybe mass incarceration and the 13th Amendment, how it didn't abolish slavery, and how we can look at that today and how it's affecting black people. How we can look at we go missing more than any other ethnic group, but we are the least reported on when it comes to that, right? We can talk about how the $23 billion difference between predominantly white schools and predominantly black schools, black communities that are subject to hazardous health because they are built near toxic plants, organ stealing, how black people go missing, they even find them with, they ain't got no organs, you know what I'm saying, in their body. And those type of things is the true woke agenda for black people, understanding that injustice that's happening around to black people, the systematic racism that happens to black people. And we have been outspoken about this. Give me y'all take on that, on what it means for y'all. And
well, before I do got a question. Why do you think? Because I give you an example. You posted it on social media a couple weeks back. You said you're starting to feel like Sharif on the cooler.
yeah,
Why do black people, specifically black people, because in Minister Society, whenever Sharif would come around, they would always say, "We don't want to hear that shit, Sharif."
yeah.
Why do you think black people look at the term woke as a bad thing?
Because
if you in Minister Society, if you look where they grew up at, Sharif was the conscious one,
yeah,
right? And that's what most white people don't want you to be.
Mm-hmm.
And in that place where they grew up at, Sharif was trying to give knowledge to his brothers,
Mm-hmm.
the community that he was in. He was trying to give them knowledge, but they never accepted it.
One of the things that they did in slavery, people call it the Willie Lynch syndrome. Now, Willie Lynch syndrome, we have no historical evidence that Willie Lynch ever existed. But when you read at the things that that's talked about on how to keep black people down, it is true. And one of those things that we suffer with as black people is what we call mental enslavement. Even though we were freed from slavery, we still have mental enslavement. That a lot of times some things that's normal to us becomes our everything. And when you introduce something new, a lot of people just want to stay with the normal. So when you look at a movie like Minister Society, they didn't want to hear what Sharif was saying because what they were seeing on an everyday basis was normal to them.
That's right.
So
and it's not popular.
Yeah.
So it's never been popular. The other thing is you got to remember during that movie, a lot of that time, when you look at the time spectrum of that movie, hip hop was starting to talk about being woke.
That was
Back then,
was
they
L.A.
talked
Rise, right?
Yeah, back then they talked about black awareness,
Public
black
enemy,
consciousness, or conscious of self,
Yeah.
right? When you're at a party and you hear that, do you really want to hear that?
Yeah.
At a party where you want to dance and for guys want to meet girls and girls want to meet guys, last thing you want to talk about is being woke,
Yeah.
right? So it wasn't popular.
Yeah.
And the Bake said it was also different than what was the norm at the time.
Mhm.
So that was considered to be abnormal. We don't want to talk about that. We're not doing that.
Right.
So it was unpopular. Even today, when you think about it today, it's very unpopular to talk about even what we're talking about today, calling the concept of woke or being hijacked by white America. It's unpopular.
Mm-hmm.
And people are afraid of things that's not popular. We talked about posts. If Bake would have posted something about the new Jordans, he would have got a bunch of views, bunch of comments. But if you post something about who actually patented the first shoe, you get very little,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we know black man was the first one to patent a shoe. So when you look at that, because it's unpopular to know that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
So how popular is it for me to comment on it, right?
Right.
It's not going to happen. It's never going to happen until we have more people looking at being self-conscious, being black aware. Until we make that the norm, until we make that part of people's normal thought process, it's It's never gonna happen.
Yeah, and you could look at what we talked about before in this podcast, just on black music, on talking about how rappers talk about killing other black people all the time,
And we glorify it.
and we glorify it, and then you go right back to listening to it. You know it's wrong, you know it's affecting our community, but we go right back to listening to it because it's the popular thing to do. You're not going to hear those conscious rappers on your radio. You're not going to hear those conscious rappers in your everyday life. So when you begin to look at what's normal for you, it becomes what's popular for you. And a lot of times in the black community, we are indoctrinated with things that we don't want to move away from, even though we know it's a problem. So that's one of those things when we talk about being woke, is you have to understand. And again, there's a lot of people who talk about being woke, but they don't have solutions, right? So you can talk about what's going on in the world all day, but another person looking at you and say, all right, so what do we do about it? And most people ain't got the answer.
Y'all know there's a phrase that we say when somebody's traveling. My grandfather Frank Mills used to say it all the time. When you were traveling, he would say, "Y'all be particular." And obviously, as a youth, you think that just means, pay attention, know where you're going, speed limit, all that good stuff. But as I got older, as I got older, I realized it was much more than that. It was also another way of saying, stay woke. Understand that black man traveling in America on the highways and byways can be unsafe for you because of how you're going to be treated just by being black. Now, when I was younger, I didn't understand that until I got a little older. And I thought about it and put it in retrospect with things that I've read about, when I was 8 or 9 years old, growing up in the 70s. You guys may have heard of the Scottsboro Boys.
Yeah.
And in Alabama, they were arrested. I think it was 9 of them were arrested for allegedly raping 2 white girls. And they escaped the death penalty, but they spent years in prison before finally they were exonerated and released. But it affected them for the rest of their lives. They never really overcame that. And I remember that there was a writer, and I wish I would have put it on, I would have documented it. I think his name was Saunders Reading or something, but he wrote an article about it. And then there was a song about it. And in the song, that says, it takes a lot to wake us up, but once we woke, we don't sleep again.
Yeah.
We don't sleep again once we woke. And Marcus Garvey talked about that long before the 70s.
In the 20s.
And the problem was it took 50 plus years before we became a woke society.
Yeah.
And the only way you become a woke society is when you have people like Shirley Chisholm running for president.
Yeah.
Right? And talking about some of the injustices and the discriminations that went on. So as a society, we wasn't woke until that happened in the 60s and the 70s. So everything that was happening before that was getting people to understand, one, black awareness, black history, giving you images that we talked about on podcast 1. When you walk into kindergarten or first grade and you see no pictures of any black people on the walls in those schools, there was no images of us being successful in America. And because of that, we were not woke.
Right.
So when we started waking up folks, and then you started going into classrooms, and of course you would see Martin Luther King, and eventually you would see people like Malcolm X, even though people would put pictures of Malcolm X in classrooms, had no idea who Malcolm X was or what he stood for. But you still never heard about people like Marcus Garvey.
Right.
Right. And it's because they want you to know what people did in accordance to what the law allowed in America for black people, not outside. Where Malcolm X, Marcus Garvey talked about, let's create new laws. Let's change these laws and create new ones. Damn just getting the right to be able to practice the vote because we have a right to. Let's go beyond that, right? Let's start getting black people woke enough to run for position. And we're going to talk about that a little bit in a minute too, because I think there's some things happening in Florida that people need to know about. And as I said before in many podcasts, when one Republican state starts doing things that negatively affect black people disproportionately, what typically happens? Other Republican states start to follow, including Virginia.
Right, absolutely. and what we're seeing now is we're starting to see that pushback, which is again it's not something that we're not used to, right? The pushback is happening because they want, when you go against the program, the pushback is going to be against anybody that questions that program. That's right. So when we talk about being woke, it's getting out of that programming that they gave you K through 12, getting out of that programming that they show you on the news, get out of the programming that they show you in every movie, like get out of that programming. And once you unhook from that program, then you're going to start to get some pushback, and they're going to say that fool crazy. Well, you know, we talk about this all the time, how they thought Dick Gregory was crazy back in the 60s when he was talking about the government being involved in all of these people's killings and all of these things. Right. And now you probably see Dick Gregory more than you see any other black person in black history now. Like even before Malcolm, before Martin, you're starting to see a lot of black people go back to Dick Gregory interviews and post what he was saying back in the 60s and the 70s.
But people thought he was crazy.
Exactly. So when we talk about, there's always been a pushback. There was pushback against abolitionists, right? Who were considered woke for thinking slavery was wrong. There was a pushback against that, right? There was a pushback when Negro workers decided to strike because they weren't getting paid the same as their white counterparts. There was an opposition to that. There was a pushback to that. There was a pushback to the civil rights movement when you're marching because you have a right to vote, and they're not allowing you to do that. And there was a pushback to that, right?
There was a pushback even to Martin Luther King. And we've talked about this on the podcast too. Before Martin Luther King was assassinated, he gave 2 interviews. And in those interviews, he talked about the initial push for the civil rights movement did not cost America anything. Because those were rights that we already had as citizens of the United States.
He talked about the next phase.
He talked about the next phase, which was going to be more of the woke concept than it was about civil rights.
Yeah.
And guess what? People pushed back. Black and white disagreed with the fact that now we're going to challenge white America and the government. And a lot of people didn't want to do that. But for the people that don't know, that's one of the biggest reasons why Martin Luther King was assassinated, is because now it was going to cost America. And I'm not talking about reparations.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's always been like one main tactic when it comes to, white supremacy, is to use black unity against black people. That's right. Because we talked about this before. I think I said it on a podcast before, how they take the word racism and then they change the meaning to where if you speak out against racism, then you're a racist. You're racist. So you use the word racist so many times that it means absolutely nothing now.
And that's what they're doing with the term woke.
That's exactly what they're doing with the term woke, right? And, they can take things and they can flip it, right? If we say that we're kneeling for the anthem because of police brutality, they said, "Nah, you're kneeling because you're anti-American. You're anti-American. You're disrespecting our troops." When we say Black Lives Matter, you automatically come back with all lives matter, right? So America has continued to change the definitions to keep people ignorant about what racism is, what indoctrination is, and what equality is,
and it becomes work. I remember, this is a little bit off subject, but I remember when I first started listening to Steve Harvey. Steve Harvey said that his mom was an everyday churchgoer. He said, we were in church Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday. He said he went to his mom and said, "Mom, if it's this much work, I'd rather just go to hell."
Rather go to hell. Yeah.
So when you start thinking about concepts that we use to be able to protest, when people start watering down those concepts, it becomes work on our part to keep those concepts alive with the true meaning. The concept woke has changed so much to where you have white Republicans using this term against us in their political runs, in their political agendas, to the point that people are questioning, what does the term woke mean?
And, school boards are using it to exclude black studies. They said it's woke.
That's right.
And a lot of people don't understand this. So let's just get to the meat and potatoes. A lot of people who consider themselves an ally to black movements are really, really hurting black movements.
That's right.
And I'm just being honest with you. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't support black people with black that are trying to do things for black people to create black change. But when allies come in and they bring their own agenda with them, you are hurting black people. Right? Because what you're doing is, when black people are talking about the racial injustice and you bring your group in and you say, yeah, racial injustice is wrong, and so is this.
That's
you're
right.
adding your agenda into it to where they say we're not going to change this because we don't agree with that. It's not that we don't agree with that the racial injustice doesn't happen. It's the thing that's attached to it that another group been brought in, and it hurts us more than it helps us because now everybody is considered woke, and you're bringing all of these agendas, your personal agendas, into what we've been saying since the 1920s about racial injustice and systematic racism. And now you're disrespecting Marcus Garvey.
That's right.
Now you're disrespecting Malcolm X. You're disrespecting Dr. King because you brought your own agenda that's been alive for 2 weeks against something that's been alive since the 1920s.
And that's not the first time in history that happened to black people. Even before the civil rights movement, when people think the civil rights movement began with Martin Luther King. That's not true.
Incorrect.
It actually started years before that.
Yeah.
All right. But in the initial beginning of the civil rights movement, there was another agenda that formed and ended up taking the forefront to the civil rights movement, which was the women's movement.
Right.
Women's rights movement. And what women said is, we're not just white women, we're women. So what do we need to be successful? We need black women.
Black women, yeah.
And with black women, we become so much stronger because you guys are fighting for black rights. We're fighting for women's rights. What makes us more powerful than having black women?
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, that hurt the black movement to where the civil rights movement was delayed for 10 years or more because of that. Now, I'm not saying what's right or wrong. I'm just saying we were used at that juncture. We were used.
Mm-hmm.
And I know it's difficult for us to say certain groups on this podcast because we don't annihilate anybody.
Right.
We don't exclude anybody. But the same thing is happening now. So every time we stand on a platform where we want to talk about black rights, there's other groups that want to stand on that same platform. And we understand that we have the spotlight now and you want to share it. And I understand.
Right.
And we're looking at it from a minority perspective rather than a racial group perspective. And I understand. But as Bake said, it does hurt the racial agenda in these cases when we do that.
Right.
We have to stop doing that. And we have to start looking in terms of what's good for black people may not be good for other groups. Wabu said this, and at the time when he said this, I disagree with him. But I do agree with him now. We got to start thinking about us first.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is.
Start thinking about us first.
And that's one of the things that they had to learn from the civil rights movement. So the civil rights movement, then people wondered why, like Malcolm X didn't want to integrate with white people saying, hey, you come in and join that program. Like, we have to do this ourselves, because if we allow you in, like you're doing down there with the NAACP and all of that stuff, you're going to take over the movement.
That's right.
And now who runs the NAACP? White people, right? So I'm not saying that you can't help us, but don't take it over.
Exactly.
And don't hurt the movement by adding your own agenda. That's know what I'm saying? Don't have the Black Lives Matter in bold print and then you put underneath it such and such matter. Again, I'm not trying to disrespect no group, but I'm saying is you are manipulating us now.
That's right.
You are manipulating us because you have black people in your group and you say, hey, why don't we just join groups? No, we've been fighting for racial justice since we got here.
That's right.
And you're disrespecting our movement that we have been saying for so long, that we have been speaking out for so long, to add your own agenda. I just believe that's disrespectful.
I agree. And we allow it to happen because we are the most forgiving people on this planet.
Yeah.
And we allow it to happen because in most instances, we want for others what we want for ourselves.
Yeah.
And if we can help you get it, we're willing to do it.
Right.
Right. And because of that, once again, we are hurting ourselves and we're hurting our movements. We can talk all day long about being woke. And somebody asked me the other day, they said, well, has woke helped or hurt the black race? Great question. Because in certain situations, it's hurt. I don't want to go too far to the left, but at this point, I think we got it.
Let's go with it.
Let's look at Terry Nichols just for a second. Here we have a case where a black man was beaten to death by black officers. And immediately people want to talk about the fact that they were black officers. Where you at now, Black America?
Yeah.
Black officers killed one of yours. And the thing is they missed the whole point.
Right.
The point wasn't that it was just black officers, because there's two major points. First point, the officers were black. They were fired immediately, not put on administrative leave.
Yep.
And
Immediately.
charged
Immediately.
immediately.
But who was the officer that wasn't charged immediately?
The white guy. The white guy. So that's problem one. Problem two is it's the case where officers started thinking that the blue
was going to protect them.
was going to protect them, even though they weren't white. Once again, people, I don't know what it's going to take for you to understand this. O.J. Simpson learned too, right? As long as you're doing what white people want you to do, you're protected.
Mm-hmm.
The minute you're not, or you're caught, you're on your own.
Right.
You're still black.
Right.
You're still nigger at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
So you killed another black, thank you, but you got to go to jail.
Right.
Now, I'm not saying that's not the right thing to do, because ultimately, I don't care what color the cops were. They should be prosecuted.
And I'm glad you just said that, because that's one thing the black community did do. We did not protect the black cops.
That's right.
We got them the fuck out of here before everybody else did.
That's right.
You know what I'm saying? We and people who seen that video, the first thing black people said was, "Oh, that looked personal."
That's right.
There were white people on my status talking about the tactics that should have gone wrong. I'm looking at it like, dude, they weren't looking for tactics. That's personal
that's
shit.
personal.
Like
That's personal.
anybody can see that.
It was definitely personal. And the thing is at that point, the race doesn't matter to me.
No.
They should be fired and they should be prosecuted the same as white officers.
Yep.
And I'll give you another case that happened not shortly after that. A lot of people probably haven't heard about this. Anthony Lowe in California, he was a double amputee, meaning he had both his legs amputated. He was in a wheelchair. He stabbed the guy several times. And then he got in his wheelchair and he fled the scene. When the cops came, he wouldn't put down the knife. But he was on his stubs, if you will.
Yeah.
And he told the cops he would stab them or throw the knife at them. Cops shot him 10 times. He had a knife, not a gun.
Mm-hmm.
10 times. Double amputee. Here's the irony behind it. One, cops not on administrative leave yet. Not fired, not charged, any of that. So people say, well, how did he lose his legs? An altercation with cops in Texas.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, and they said, well, why did he flee? Well, one, he lost his legs in an altercation with cops in Texas just a year ago. One. Two, not long before that, there was another guy, Keenan Anderson, who pleaded while cops was brutally beating him. They're trying to George Floyd me. These are the same cops, same location, that happened just a few days prior to that. And then just hours before he died, there was another kid that was killed by Oscar Sanchez. That was killed by the same cops.
Mm-hmm.
So why wouldn't he run?
Right.
So when you look at that, that's another situation where he was aware that I'm going to be treated differently when these.
And you said, and that's the key word, aware. When you're woke, you're aware. And a lot of people who claim woke don't understand that whole concept. They don't understand how it is, even if you didn't do anything wrong, how it feels when police approaches you when you're black, because you've never had that experience before.
And
you don't have the history of that.
All these protests, George Floyd, Mike Brown, all these instances where we were killed by cops, it's still happening.
Yeah.
It's still happening. So has it changed anything? Well, we know in most cases they're charging officers a lot sooner, in most cases, especially if they're black. But has it stopped them from doing it?
Yeah. We're going to take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back. And we are back. We're going to jump right back in. DeSantis have engineered and recently signed into law the Stop Woke Act down there in Florida, a title that persistently captures what the bill architects aim to do: stop people in Florida from speaking out in ways that challenge racism and other kinds of discrimination. Literally stopping people from speaking out about racism. Again, they're using that word against us. Like it's literally a weapon against us now. So anything that goes against what they consider to be woke is going to be used against us, right? So like I said, I feel like it's disrespectful because it ain't doing nothing but hurting us. You know what I'm saying? So when we talk about cancel culture, like that's like a subdivision of woke, right?
Right.
Cancel culture, like black people wasn't canceling people who made like a simple mistake. Like, okay, educate yourself and move on with it. Now you got people, if they say one thing wrong, cancel him. And then people are saying that like, wait, why are we canceling people off a simple mistake? And it makes us look bad, like we're just canceling people just because of race issues. But that's not what black people have been doing all along.
Absolutely. And Governor Santos, he's not the only one. But let's just talk about him for a second, because that's one of my least favorite states. So he implemented policies in schools that criticize for limiting discussions in curriculum on race, right? Systematic oppression, gender and sexual orientation, and saying that he wants to give parents more say in what their kids learn in school. However, he's only talking to one group of parents.
Yeah.
White.
Right.
They don't want any discussions that depict a race as being racist or violent. What that means is, as long as it's not black people saying it.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is they were okay with it for the last 300 years teaching it.
Yeah,
right?
for
It was
sure.
Perfectly fine.
Perfectly fine.
With them teaching about slavery and giving those first images of blacks, which we know they want to say us in America as slaves, as subordinates, right?
Mm-hmm.
They were okay with it. But what they're not okay with us is saying that's what you did to us. So how we got to that point, they don't want to discuss anymore, right? In fact, they don't want to discuss Black history at all, which I think is ironic, because people always ask the question, and I love your podcast where you talk about what Black history means to you, and you break it down in parts. And people ask me, what does Black history mean to me? And my answer is me.
It is.
What it means to me is me.
It's that
Because
mirror.
Black history to me means the two of you, my grandkids. Black history means my dad. The things that my dad, unsavory things that my dad had to endure raising a family in the 60s and the 70s. And what my mom had to endure in the 60s and 70s as a mother of three, living in inner city Washington, D.C., what they had to endure as Black people. Black history means me and the things that they went through, giving me the opportunity to learn about those visuals that I never seen when I was in first grade and second grade, giving me the opportunity to learn about Benjamin Banneker, who is probably one of the smartest Black people in the history of America. You wouldn't have learned about those people. I wouldn't have learned about those people if it wasn't for my mom and dad, because the school system didn't teach us that. So being woke started for me at an early age, thanks to people like my mom and dad. So when people talk about what Black history means to me, it means me. It means where I came from, but it also tells me who I am now, but what I can be in the future, as well as the two of you and my 5 grandkids.
Absolutely. So when we talk about what Black history means to us, like again, it has to be relatable, right?
That's right.
So when we look at those images and we read about those people and we read about those things, it has to find some way to relate back to us, the people who look like us, that come from where we come from, that been through what we've been through, that understand us, like those are our ancestors, and we thank them for that. But here's the thing, right? Dick Gregory wrote a book called what is it called? No More Lies. No More Lies. Right. And in this book, he goes down the American education system and he talks about what white America, the story that white America tells. And then he always ends with, well, did you ask Native Americans that?
That's right.
Did you ask Black people that, how they feel about that situation? So when you have a story like the Thanksgiving story with the Pilgrims,
That's right.
how do the Native Americans feel about that story that's in those classrooms and hearing about this glorious story that isn't true?
That's right.
How do they feel about that? How do they feel about being relocated further northwest as you expand your country and your principles? How do they feel about
That's
that?
right.
You know what I'm saying? How do Black people feel when you talk about George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and all of those founding fathers on how great heroes there was? Have you asked a Black kid how you feel about it? You might ask him before you tell him the whole truth.
That's right.
But if you tell him that he was a slave master, did you tell him that he would sell people for little or nothing? Did you tell him that he would rape his slaves? If you told him that, he's going to feel a little bit differently about what you're teaching him.
Absolutely.
So when we talk about indoctrination, the things that they don't want to let into the school system, that they say indoctrinate the white kids, the things that they've been teaching for over 300 years, indoctrinate the black kids.
Absolutely.
And they don't want to change that. So when we look at the educational system, let's go back, because I want to go back to something that you said earlier. How they use black people against black people, right? And we are woke enough to understand that the black people, they constantly use black people to go to war with other black people. And that black person don't necessarily always refer to themselves as being black. You hear them when they speak, you know what I'm saying? They say them, they. Black people in this country. They never say we. They never incorporate themselves into being black. They always, it's always another way around. That's how you know they're the enemy, right? So it doesn't surprise us, because when you go back to the plantation, there's always that one Negro to say, "What's the matter, boss? Are we sick?" You know what I mean? It was a we thing. When the master was around, that fool tried to act like he was a slave, in the words of Malcolm X. You know what I'm saying? The first full-time FBI agent was there to spy on Marcus Garvey. This is not something that we're not used to. So we understand that they reward black people for going against black people. You know what I'm saying? Those people get put on the news every day. There are people with social media accounts. The only thing that they do is talk against black people, and they black. That's right. And they get millions of followers, and their comments is white people saying, "Tell it how it is, brother. Tell them how it is." And when you get that pat on your head, you blow up. And for them, even today, when you do that enough, hell, they'll vote for you in political office and with no political experience.
Absolutely. Herschel Walker.
Yeah, exactly. So there's always been some pushback against black people by using black people. It ain't nothing changed. But when we look at the K through 12 system, we know that true black history is not going to be taught. We understand that there's a reason why they want their narrative painted the way that they want to paint. They want to program us to believe in that American narrative story that they created. This is why black history studies are optional. That's right. You don't have to be tested on this. You don't have to sign up for this. You don't need to know it. As he said, it doesn't have any value. Right. So that's why we have to do our own self-education. We have to do our own research. We as parents know that even if they choose to teach black history, they ain't going to teach it the right way.
Yeah, because who's going to teach it?
Right, they're going to manipulate it in a way to where it's still going to be beneficial to them. So as us, we still have to be able to educate ourselves to educate our kids. If you own a business and it's a Fortune 500 company, $1 million business, you're doing well, you're not going to send your kid to school to learn about that business. You'll teach them at home. I want you to learn the business and the way to run it. I'm going to teach you what you need to know. You go to school and get that other stuff, but I'm going to teach you and groom you on how to run this. That's what we got to do with our kids. We have to groom them and teach them about our own history so they can be able to grow and do the necessary things to change our community. Right?
Yeah, the problem, and I agree 100%, but the problem is how many people are going to learn about this themselves to teach them.
And that's their responsibility on black people. We can't expect white America to do it. Why would you want them to?
No. And that's, somebody asked me that. It was like, so why is it a big deal if white America, which controls the school system, the curriculum in most cases, what's the big deal about them not wanting to teach black history? Because you guys claim they're not going to teach them the right way.
Because let me answer that first. We have black educators who can do it. Right. And they're in that school system and they're dying, they're boiling when they have to read through these things and not understand it.
But I also think that people have a misunderstanding. When we talk about black history and teaching black history, true black history, it's about more than just teaching black people black history. It's about teaching white people black history too. Right. But it's more about teaching what we all hear when you hear these people talk about convicting people, charging and convicting people of crime. People say, well, we want justice, we want truth, right? Sometimes truth and justice aren't the same thing, right? What we really want first is the truth. That's what we really want. We want the truth. From getting the truth, we create our own justice. Right. But you have to have the truth first. But not just black America, But white America needs to know the truth too. So when the curriculum's teaching white kids their version of history, they're not learning the truth.
They're lying to them.
They're lying
They're
to them.
manipulative to them. And that gives you that supremacy that you feel that you have.
Absolutely.
Because everything that's conquered, everything that's great, everything that was developed, everything that's wealthy is white.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even the angels is white.
and they stand on those principles. They stand on those principles. So when you get a black person who's woke, right, and they're challenging that white person that's been taught their whole lives about white supremacy and how this country was built, because we know it was built on white supremacy. Who you think gonna win in that standoff?
Mm-hmm.
Who's gonna win?
Mm-hmm.
Because both of them are deeply committed to their principles. The problem is we need to teach white America the truth so that their principles are in line with the truth.
Right.
So that we create justice and equality. Without doing that, you're always going to have injustice and inequality.
Right, because it's the same thing that's going into your household, right? So the things that your grandmother taught you, things that your grandmother taught your mother taught you, and you taught us, and you grew up in that household, and you get that principle by principle by principle, and it's a lineage there. It's generational principles that you live by because those are what your ancestors live by. Same thing happens in school. Once you teach those principles again and again, now their grandparents and their parents and you and the next generation after them, they're going to believe whatever it is that you taught them in that school.
That's right.
Because those are the principles that you laid down. So those founding father principles that all men are created equal, but you got slavery. Wait a minute now.
That's right.
Wait a minute now. So all of those principles don't apply because you're not telling the truth.
That's right.
Right? And there are people who really think this is the American freedom. Like this is the key to freedom, that you can be anything you want. Hell yeah, you can be anything you want. You can be an exceptional liar too, and that's what America has been.
That's right. I got a reel somebody sent me Facebook. I'm not gonna say the person's name because I know a lot of what we talk about on here, some people can't engage because of their job or whatever they have going on, and I understand it. But they sent me a reel, and it was an episode of Different Strokes. And for people who don't remember that show, that was
I know you're talking about.
Family,
he sent it to me too.
Family that had adopted 2 black brothers, and during sitcom times, he would have been considered one of America's TV dads, right? And I remember Willis. He told his dad. He said they asked him in school. They said, "Well, what do you dislike?" And he says, "I hate being a nigger." And the teacher got all upset, called Mr. Drummond. Mr. Drummond got him home and talked to him and said, "Well, how did you say that?" And he said, "Because I do. I hate how we're treated." He said, "Let me ask you a question. Would you rather be a dumb, broke white person or a smart nigger?" And Mr. Drummond walked out the room. Because the answer to it is, no matter what the situation is, he'd rather be white because he knows how blacks are treated in America.
Yeah.
So the thing is the average white person would admit that black people are treated differently. However, you will take a large percentage of those and say, but it's a lot better than it used to be. So if you stab me in the back with a knife with 8 inches and you take 2 inches out, you still stab me in the back.
Not progress. Not progress. Right. And you know what I'm saying? When we look at the educational system, we know like it's a gap, right? We talked about that $23 billion gap between predominantly black schools and predominant white schools. One of the best shows on TV right now is called Abbott Elementary.
That's right.
It won so many awards and people are acknowledging how great of a show it is. But don't forget about what the show is about. It's about the underfunding of predominantly black schools. Like that's a huge case. Yes, it's funny. Yes, the actress and the actors are great. But don't miss the point of the show.
That's right.
Like look at what they have to go through just to be able to teach their kids. And now you can see why the opportunities is limited in the areas of those places, right? When a black kid takes a test, like it's not going to be culturally for him. He's not going to understand what some of those standardized words means to come from white culture. So if you're not implementing black culture, how do you expect black kids to be able to pass your standardized test?
That's
right. You know what I'm saying? So even what they're doing right now, of course, they're banning books and they call it indoctrination. You know what I'm saying? But CRT, and that's one of the ones that they use too in political propaganda is
critical race theory.
CRT. But CRT, like we talked about in this podcast, is not a K through 12 curriculum. It is taught in law school. And what they did was they made it seem like they were going to teach that to your fourth grader.
That's right.
And they took that political agenda and they ran with it and said, we don't want our kids to feel bad about such and such or feel bad about slavery. And they created that without even reading about what it was.
That's right.
And made an agenda. But there are other people who used it for their own political gain, and the pushback came, and now it hurt black people again.
That's right.
Because now every black studies that go through, they're going to call it critical race theory. Now black history is generally going to be called critical race theory to keep black history from entering the schools. So again, you tried to help, but you hurt us more than you helped us. Right. So we begin to look at those things. It could just be something small when they talk about pushing an agenda. One of my favorite authors is James Baldwin, who was a black activist, but he was also a homosexual.
That's right.
So if you add into black history studies that he was a black activist and a black homosexual, now they're going to say you're pushing an agenda of homosexuality.
That's right.
Just because
it's going to take away from everything that he did.
Right?
That's right.
And we know that black people with college degrees are twice as likely to be unemployed as all other graduates. But it's not just that educational system that's when we see the woke movement, right? When you see a black kid on the news or a black victim even a black victim, black person who committed a crime, the media has a tendency to show a mugshot for a black person.
That's right.
They could have picked any picture they want to for Trayvon Martin. They could have picked a school picture. What picture they picked? They picked a picture of him holding up gang signs.
That's right.
You know what I'm saying? You see pictures where the victim of a crime and he in an orange jumpsuit. And that's to portray to the media that you should not feel bad for this victim because he's a criminal.
Mm-hmm. And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter the pay scale that you're on. I mean, they did the same thing to OJ. When OJ was arrested, they showed his mugshot, right?
Right, and they darkened it.
Right.
Yeah.
When what's the Chrisleys? What's their name? The Chrisleys, the husband and wife that have the show, the Chrisleys.
Oh,
you know what I'm talking about. But anyway, they're in prison for tax evasion. Never showed their mugshot once, right? They showed them made up and ready.
Yeah.
Right? No, and they got to turn themselves in, so they got to get home set first before they get turned themselves in. I can speak from experience. I didn't get to set up home before they put me in.
Yeah.
Right. So it doesn't matter how much money you make. What matters is at the end of the day, white or black are going to be treated differently.
Right.
Not just by the judicial system, but also in the eyes of the media.
Mm-hmm.
We know the media sometimes controls the justice system. Do we think that if there was no media involved, would the murderers of George Floyd ever been arrested, let alone found guilty?
No.
So the media was significant in that happening. And it can play either or.
Mm-hmm.
Either it can play a role in them getting found not guilty, or they can always deem them as not being the same as black people in a court of law, and they're treated differently.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. We also see it when it comes to the case of a child that's been arrested. Now, supposedly, that child's name, face, is never supposed to be revealed because they're juveniles. But if it's a black child, they're going to find out.
Absolutely.
And it's going to release it.
I watched First 48. And on First 48, I've seen them interview 16-year-olds who initially, when they're interviewing them, they're not suspects.
Mm-hmm. But if they're 16, they're supposed to have
should have a parent there. And the fact is that you're interviewing them, and let's just say there's 3 of them, and you're interviewing Baker and Shaquan. You're not interviewing Jerome. Who's the suspect?
Right.
So I mean, you can put it together and figure out who the other juvenile suspect is.
Yeah.
If it's 3 of them, and I got 2 in the room with a camera on them, and I got their name posted or who they are. right?
Even if you like, even with the case where the kid shot his teacher, when they released the name of the mother,
That's right.
okay, now we can figure out who the child is.
Yeah, it's not equal. It's not the same level of protection or the same level of justice, because we keep forgetting about the protection part. Because I mentioned Oscar Sanchez, who was killed by LAPD. What I didn't mention was he was having a mental breakdown, and his family called the cops for help, and that's what happened.
It's not something
I asked this question on a podcast before, and this came off of the series that I used to watch on TV, Empire, that Cookie Taraji P. Henson made the statement, who do we call when we need help? We don't get the same level of protection nor justice. So it's not just the justice part, because the law enforcement is supposed to do what? Serve and protect. We don't get the protection, and we sure as hell don't get the justice.
Absolutely. You know, we can even look at when it comes to the media, the movies, right? When you look at how many more slave movies do we need?
None.
You know what I'm saying? It's like it's always a point, especially if there's a white director, to point out a slave movie. Let's make another slave movie. And this is why we have Black History Month. If you want to find some people to go make a movie about, trust me, we can give you some names. Right. It doesn't have to be a slave movie. It doesn't have to be a segregation movie to give us more black trauma, more we call it black trauma porn. We don't need any more of that. When you show pictures and movies of Africa, it's got to be war crimes. You don't want to show us the Mansa Musas. You don't want to show us the Queen Nzingas. You don't want to show us that. You want to show us the war crimes. You want to show us the kids who are starving. You want to show us all of that, right? You want to show the corruption, the Hotel Rwanda type stuff. Like, you don't want to show us the other side of the positive. That's what it's supposed to be. Like, we need more positive. That's why we need more black directors. We need more black writers to be able to put those images, because a lot of times when you leave that in the hands of white people, they want to tell a story the way that they want to tell it. And even if they tell a black story, we get that white savior that's not even a real character into the story. All right.
Now, I will say, though, that anytime you have a movement, you are going to need some help. And I've said this before. Barack Obama did not win presidency because every black person in America voted for him. He won presidency because there were some white people that voted for him as well. Otherwise, he would have never won. So we're going to need some help in order to make these agendas work. And the one thing I would remind black people is you can't worry about the why. We're always concerned about the why. Why would white people be willing to die for a cause? And let's just go on record as saying there's a lot. In fact, I believe the first person killed in the civil rights movement during Martin Luther King's era was a white guy. So let's just be real that there are a lot of white people that sacrifice their lives and livelihoods for the sake of the black movement, right? So I'm not discounting what they brought to the table.
No, but those people that you're talking about didn't try to take over the movement either.
No,
they played their part. They played their part.
That's right. They have to be willing. You know, this is the one thing that Louis Farrakhan said. No, Malcolm X actually said it first. Is that he had a white girl ask him one time, what can we do to help your movement? He said nothing.
Absolutely nothing.
And then years later, they asked him, they said, well, is there anything that you regret? He said, yes. I had a white lady approach me one time and asked me what could she do to help the movement, and I told her nothing. I should have told her, what I need you to do is go back to your friends, your family, your co-workers, and talk about the oppression of black people, right? So that's what we need from white America. We don't just need you to hold hands with us when we're protesting.
Yeah.
We need you to go back and stand up for these rights, because it's the right thing to do. We're not asking you to give us anything that we don't already have or shouldn't already deserve by the Constitution. So if you believe the Constitution, then you should go back to your friends and family and co-workers and talk about injustices that happen to us on a regular basis. Stand up for us and support us when things are wrong